My first palm tree was a disaster. I don't have a picture of it, but believe me, it was. And that happened because I was trying so hard to include every leaf in a branch, and I ended up with a spiky mess that didn't have a volume and definitely didn't quite look like a tree I was painting. That was years ago, and during these years I learned a few things as an artist, and one of those things is that you don't really start with the smallest detail. Before I add any of those beautiful highlights on the leaves or even the leaves themselves, I'm going to break up the overall silhouette of a tree into smaller shapes, and I'm going to do it based on value, which parts are darker and which are lighter. Then, once it's ready, I'm going to start with defining the whole branches and then leaves. And at first, I'm setting up the darker values. So whatever is that darker color or mid-tone color that's underneath the highlights, that's what I want to add first. And I'm always thinking about a pastel painting in layers. So what's underneath? So later the highlight that I'm going to add is going to create a nice contrast. Otherwise, it's just not going to stand out. So that's what this demo is about. And here I'm working on the sanded paper. I believe this one is Canson Touch. It's a sanded version of their paper, and it's quite rough. You can see the texture. I'm working lightly and actually already with the softer pastels, softer brands, but I will be using some of the harder pastels for some details. But softer pastels make it a little bit easier right now to cover larger areas. And here's something else. You can see that there's a division in the reference photo. You can see there's a division between the lighter, somewhat lighter branches and the darker branch in the back. But there's also a division between cooler greens and warmer greens. So those that are lighter are actually a little bit warmer, meaning those greens have a little bit more orange or yellow within them. That's why that olive green is going to be contrasting with that cooler green already at this stage. Now that I have the midtones and darker midtones, now I can actually start punching the darker values and creating more depth within the tree. So those would be more recessed areas where the light doesn't quite illuminate those areas. And that starts creating the illusion of a more three-dimensional object. For this tree to look realistic, we need to show that it actually exists in space and different areas of it receive different amount of light. And we have to see how to treat these different areas. For example, the tree trunk has some shadow from the middle part, and then it's going to have some highlights. So with my light midtones, because the tree trunk is light, it's pretty light here, but I still set up a little bit of a shadow on the right, and eventually I will also add the highlight there. But right now I also want to emphasize the shadows so that that tree trunk stands out, so that the lighter color is going to stand out. And I'm working pretty lightly so that I still have some room to build up more color. Starting to add some of this beautiful, brilliant light on the tree trunk, and you can see how it just lights up this whole little sketch. So far I had only darker colors, pretty much darker midtones and richer dark colors, but now that I have that highlight, that really brings it to life, and there will be more of it. And that's the beautiful part now begins, bringing the highlights in. But before that, I still want to add a little bit more of a detail with the darker colors. And now I can actually start adding some of those linear elements, adding a little bit of texture to those areas that were basically just kind of flat greens so far, because they were the base. Now I can start working with a little bit lighter but not very light greens, and I'm going to show those thin leaves catching the wind and showing this beautiful movement within the palm tree. And yes, sometimes I'm using the brush to remove maybe a little bit of a pigment. And look at this beautiful chromatic light green. It's not really that light, but the contrast that I created there, the darker color and this lighter green, they really work well together. And it makes that front branch stand out quite a bit against the darker area. And with this lighter, more chromatic green, I would like to highlight a little bit some of those elements that catch maybe a little bit more light, but not flooded with light. So they still have a lot of color, they're still chromatic. Besides, I'm going to add the highlights on top of that later, so I do need some color underneath. And the center of the palm seems to be a little bit warmer, kind of golden color. The branches are thinner there, so maybe there's more light penetrating through the branches. If you enjoyed this video, please do me a favor, give it a like. It does help me a lot, and I also would love to hear from you in the comments. I'm using this orange, and I do push my colors. I'm not going to just, okay, this is this kind of murky brown in the photograph and that's what I'm going to use. No, it doesn't really have to be that way. And besides, I go more for the feeling that certain colors will create. And what about this purple? Well, that purple was to kind of merge those greens with the blues of the sky that I'm going to add. The silhouette of a tree doesn't really have those hard edges. There are a lot of smaller branches and leaves on the outside that kind of soften the transition, soften the edge between the sky or whatever is behind and the tree, the silhouette of the tree. So they usually are not that dark. I'm using here purple. It is a transitional color into the blues, and I don't want to jump right from the dark, very dark colors, let's say, into the very light colors, because besides the hard edge, that could also create the chalky halo around the tree shape, and I don't want that to happen. And how much fun it is to carve with the blue into this mess of green to create the leaves and the branches. And that's the beauty of the negative painting, meaning painting outside the shape. And I can use bits of the background, leave them, and suggest a detail out of that. So that purple can actually suggest like a piece of branch. So that's nice. And I love the look. It's just more spontaneous, and you can also work on the side of the stick, kind of on the edge, and you can create these sharper linear marks. And I love the rhythm these marks create. It's definitely something that adds to the character of the tree. And if you noticed, I switched to a little bit darker blue for the top part of the sky. And also that blue is better when I'm doing spacing between the branches within the tree. It's usually better when it's a little bit darker. So there's less contrast and it doesn't jump out of the tree as much. So why a darker blue in the top part of the sky? Well, because that's what we see. Usually the top part of the sky, if we look up on a blue sky day, it's going to be darker, and towards the horizon that blue is going to become a little bit lighter and maybe a little bit greener, or maybe a little bit more. It depends how much impurity in the air or moisture in the air. So pay attention to that, and your sky will have more dimension, more depth. And it's not just about pure chromatic colors. A lot of lovely grays and neutrals go into the painting, and this one is no exception. Now that's the exciting moment I'm kind of waiting for usually when I'm painting. even those lighter greens were creating those beautiful detailed leaves, but now with this highlight color I can definitely bring that sparkle into it. And don't rush when you do this. Try not to overdo it, but it is addictive, and it's like this beautiful contrast. It's really bringing a lot of light into the picture, into the painting. And because these highlights, these finishing touches, they are so light, they are so contrasting in value with a darker background, they are going to stand out. So make them more expressive, make them to express the movement, make them more interesting, give them some character. That's the final stages of working on something like this. And also, don't forget that chromatic color, we cannot eliminate it to the point when we have just the highlights and the very dark values. That would mean we lost the light. If there's so much dark color and just the highlights, there's no transition, there's no light that's bouncing from brightly lit areas into the shadows, or maybe the backlit branches. Now, if you remember that very first stage, that very general shape that's hiding underneath all these details, you probably wouldn't recognize it. And that's the beauty of working from larger shapes to detail to smaller shapes, because later, once the foundation is established, I can add as many details as I want to. Of course, that's a different question, how many details I want to include, right? Usually it's not that many. I only need to add something that really tells the story, something that moves the eye around, some details that show off the character of this tree, or maybe showing the direction of light, the quality of light, all that. I can also create an illusion of a detail, of a lot of details, but in fact, it's only going to be like a softer, flat mark. Like, for example, if I'm showing those thin, sparkling leaves in the center, that was a mark made with a flat side of the pastel stick, but it does create the illusion of a lot of leaves, a lot of thin leaves. So things like that are going to help me as well, so that I have fewer sharper edges, but still can create that shining effect, that glistening effect. Of course, it's up to you how many details you include. It's about your personal style and you're the judge. My style is more expressive, so I should try to stop very soon here. I hope painting a palm tree does not look as scary now and you're going to try it. I also have a video of painting a beach scene, so it's kind of quite fitting with the subject. You can watch it next. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and please give it a like if you did. And I love reading your comments, so please do that.